There are 4 times as many payday lenders in Alabama as there are McDonald's. Payday loans have been called a form of modern-day slavery. That's why our next guest is determined to break the cycle of poverty that they perpetuate. Take a look.
You may recognize Pastor Van Moody from the Dr. Oz Show. He also serves on the board for Joel Osteen's network. Van has inspired many on stages around the world. His latest topic is tackling economic inequality. He says the civil rights movement of the 60s may have provided civil rights, but many minorities are still struggling financially. Today, Van shares what we can do to advocate change, educate people, and to break the unending cycle of poverty.
Please welcome back to the 700 Club, Van Moody. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Terry. It's an honor to be here.
That is quite a statistic. 4 times more payday lenders than McDonald's in Alabama. Van, how did we get there?
Well, unfortunately, there are laws and things in place that actually take advantage of underserved communities. Unfortunately, in Alabama, for an example, 46,000 people take out payday loans each week. And at that rate, the cycle of poverty will continue for generations, and we've got to break it.
But Van, if 46,000 people are doing that on a regular basis, then there is some kind of a need there that even though the payday lending isn't the answer, they need help. So what is the answer? How do you turn that around?
Well, the answer is micro-lending with education. Educational theorists will tell you that when you really go to help individuals, you have to take into consideration 3 things. And this is really how education happens. There's unconscious ignorance. This is where people just don't know what they don't know. Then there's conscious ignorance. And then the 3rd stage is where education actually begins. The reason that things like payday lending and other cycles of poverty keep growing is because it takes advantage of people in that unconscious ignorance category. So we marry micro-lending because they do need opportunities for banking and things on a small kind of scale, but then we partner it with the education that is desperately needed. I really believe that the opposite of poverty is not wealth, it's opportunity and education.
You say that the civil rights movement fell short. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, one of the things that Dr. King realized at the end of his life, and he began to shift, but unfortunately was assassinated, is that civil rights without economic rights are really no rights at all. Yeah. One of the last things he did was he started the Poor People's Campaign, which was an initiative towards economic equality. And so really what I'm doing and what others are passionate about is really the continuation of the dream that Dr. King had 50+ years ago.
You just recently met with the president and a number of other leaders. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was there, and that was my 2nd time this year being a part of a task force that is helping with the First Step Act, which is a bill that has passed the House. Hopefully it will pass the Senate. But it is about prison reform and workforce development, and that is a really, really big issue. It speaks to economic inequality, but also a great way to help underserved communities and primarily a forgotten people in prison.
How important is it to shore up the family in neighborhoods that are suffering with poverty? I mean, it just seems like that's a terrible blight.
Absolutely. Every sociologist, psychologist, anthropologist, social scientist will tell you that every major issue, when you peel it to its least common denominator, whether it's crime, whether it's poverty, whether it's the murder rate, it all goes back to the fracturing of the family. So if we can rebuild the family, which is one of the reasons why prison reform is so important, the majority of individuals of African-American descent in prisons are men. And so it is a family issue. It is an economic issue. It's a great issue that we have to address.
That's going to take some programs for people who are coming out of a prison scenario.
Absolutely.
To change a mindset. I mean, talk a little bit about that, because all these things that you're talking about, programs and whatever, we have to find a way to change the way that people think, the way that they're kind of stuck, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, it's the same thing that the Apostle Paul tells us about being transformed by the renewing of our mind. And one thing that people have to understand about reform, particularly with prison reform, is that reform starts day 1.
Yeah.
Because it is not just about someone serving their prison sentence. It is about their mindset being changed and also giving them the opportunity, once that mindset change has happened, so that they can continue in the positive direction once they are released from prison.
Yeah. You had an experience in your own family with your parents when you were younger where that whole financial thing caused things to fall apart. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. My stepfather made a horrible financial decision, and it led to my mother actually having a nervous breakdown, and shortly thereafter my stepfather had a heart attack and died. And that experience, watching it firsthand, having to visit my mother in the hospital, and spending all of my 10th grade year having to stay with my best friend's family because my mother was hospitalized, gave me a front row seat to understand how important financial literacy and financial education really is. But then also, as a pastor, as a student of the Word of God, financial literacy and how we handle God's money, it's a stewardship issue, but it's a lordship issue. That's one of the greatest ways that we model good discipleship, how we handle what God has given us. And I learned that firsthand.
A responsibility. It's interesting how that shaped your life today. I want to mention, because we're talking about the whole issue of poverty, but your book is called Desired by God, that's just come out. You've written others. What's the takeaway from this one?
One of the most important things that I deal with in Desired by God for people is that you cannot live a purpose-filled, successful, great life until you engage into a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you have to have a clear understanding of the heart of the Father, who is God. And you also have to understand how much He deeply loves us. And that's what Desired by God will reveal to people. It's the third book in a trilogy based on the encounter that Jesus has in Matthew, where that teacher comes up to him and says, of all of the law of Moses, which is the greatest? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. The first two books dealt with loving your neighbor and loving yourself. Desired by God deals with how we love the Lord with all of our heart, mind, and soul. And you got to know who He is and how passionately in love with you He is.
Absolutely. It's what changes us, right?
Absolutely.
Desired by God. I want people to know it's available wherever books are sold. And you can hear more from Van today on our Facebook page. All you have to do is go to facebook.com/700 Club. Great to have you with us again. Thank you, Van. Always nice to see you.